Hi, I'm Jay, and today I'm tying with black squirrel and hen capes. Stay tuned. So, welcome back to the bench. I've been painting all morning. It's early afternoon now. I got some jig heads drying that I'll be tying up during the week. We're well into walleye season now, and just being as busy as I can be. But before I started back into all the larger jigs, tying bucktails, I thought I'd turn the cameras on and tie up a couple jigs. During the week I got a black squirrel pelt in the mail and was excited just to kind of play with a little bit. So I got that pelt in during the week. It's kind of interesting. We do have black squirrels here in New York State, though I'd have to drive about an hour north before I saw one. And but as you can see, this is the back, which is fairly dark, but it does have flashes of brown and tan. And then if we turn the pelt over, there's grays and browns. It's very similar to what you'd find on a muskrat pelt, but it makes a very nice dubbing. The guy who sent me this left the whiskers. They actually make nice tails for dry flies. In the tail, very similar to a gray squirrel, though the hair does feel different. I'd have to say it feels slightly more coarse, or at least thicker. Though it's practically identical. This gray squirrel tail, it just feels finer, like a fine hair. And maybe it's just this one particular pelt, but this natural black hair, it just feels slightly thicker. There is, and we'll see when we cut our pinch, there is a lot of short under hair, so that maybe it's just the location where it's from. Not 100% sure. If it's an animal that lives a little bit farther north in the colder climate, maybe it's just as simple as that. So try not to be too smart about it. What we're going to tie is a 1/32 jig, and we're going to add, so it's not a plain black tail, but I'm using feathers similar to what I would use in tying Adam's dry fly wings. These are actually capes by Ewing. Real nice feathers on these. I don't find them much locally. Usually it's Metz or Whiting that I'm finding at my local shops. But Ewing aren't too bad. I really like them. They're not, by no means what we're doing here today should you be using your expensive fly tying feathers. These capes, which will do hundreds of jigs, the Ewing I think are around $15. I do have a Whiting cape here. As you can see, the barbs are the bars rather a little bit wider, and this one even averages, what's the price on this one? $20. I spent $20 for this Whiting. But we're using the barred capes today. With the Ewing, I have this is a rust color, or a cream orange, I guess. Interesting color. I've used that on some flies. Here's a tan. It's almost a dun to me, though they call it a tan. This is another Ewing. And what else do we have? Just as an example, I pulled out, here's a hook and hackle. And like I said, don't use your expensive wing material. This hen and hackle back is $6. I paid $6 for it. So let's get situated. Now this 3/32 ball, this you can, I'm sure it's fairly obvious, is a mustad hook. I do have some though. This one without the dot, without the pupil, you can see pretty obvious. It's a 570 eagle claw hook, very similar to the mustad 53746, I think it is, hook that we use for the 3/32 ball. Since this is a small headed jig, so as an example, here's a 1/2, the walleye style, the Barumba head that we tie, and it blocks out the 3/32. So we are tying a fairly small jig. I do like the size. I fish mostly for perch with a jig like this, along with the 1/32 or the 1/16 and the 1/8 of the football head, that jig with the minnow profile. And as you can see, I've been tying some 1/8s. I got a 1/8 head here as well. All good jigs to use, all good jig styles to use. But on this ball head, we're going to lock on our 2/0 thread, walk it down about 1/3 of the way with open wraps, and then back up to the head. And we can begin with our black tail. Now I'm not against using dyed hair, but I always like it when you can get hair and feathers that are natural colors, that they were, that's the natural color of the hair, as opposed to having to dye it fancy color. Now this squirrel tail is fairly uniform. I'm not going to restack. I'm just pulling out, there's 2 or 3 long hairs, but for the most part, that's stacked. I will pull out a couple of these short hairs that I mentioned, and I'm going to make the tail the length of the body, past the bend of the hook. And on my vise, about that 3rd marking is what I'm aiming for. As I hold the pinch in my hand and I can look at the white card that's on my table and really see the fibers of this pinch, I can tell that about almost the width of my pinky finger, it goes from black, and then the tips are actually brown. So the coloring is really kind of neat. It's not obviously brown, but holding it against that white background, I definitely can see that there is a difference. Give that a twist, go back for another pinch. Almost looks like there's some gray mixed in here, but I think that's just the way the light is reflecting off the tail, because when I change positions and look at those same hairs, they're not gray. So again, just pull out the buttons. And again, no need to really restack. It kind of has a natural shape to it. Make sure that the length is the same. Keep this left hand pinch tight. Lock this into place with 4 wraps towards the bend of the hook, a couple wraps back, crossing over to lock that into place. And at this point, I've already stripped some feathers from that cape, but I'm basically, for an Adams wing, I'm taking a lot of them from this section here, and I actually just moved up just a little bit because the jig is a little bit longer, so I can use some of these feathers as we get farther down the cape. On the chicken, the head is on this end, the feet are on this end, so as we go down, you can get away with using some of those longer feathers on a jig. So this is what I've peeled off, and those barbs, or the bars on the feather, the black and the white, really show up nicely. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure so it's about the length of the hook shank, stopping about, this is where the bend of the hook would be. So I measure that. What I'm going to do is take my fly tying scissors, I'm going to trim it like so, and then splay out these barbs just so I can take away about a 32nd of an inch. And then I do the same with the second feather, and I basically just measure it against the feather that I just trimmed and I have laying on my table, so I can see how they match up. So now I can take the feather and lay it right down the lateral line of the jig. A couple wraps towards the bend of the hook to lock that feather in place, and a couple wraps towards the head, and then I can flip my vise, do the same. I just lay the feather right down the lateral line, trying to hold it where you could see, like so. A couple wraps towards the bend of the hook, a couple wraps back towards the head, and I can look, make sure that they're lined up parallel. And before we finish this off, I have the New Age Crinkle Flash, that gold stone, which is a color that I really like. We used it on the walleye jigs that we airbrushed. And the New Age Crinkle Flash is just, it's a flash that has become my new favorite. And what we're going to do is I have 4 or 5 strands, and I'm going to put it right down what becomes the belly of the jig. So we're just going to put it right down the top of the jig as it sits in our vise, lock it into place. As you can see, that the length is perfect, it goes right to the tip. And then I can just finish the collar, just looking at it from all sides, making sure that feather is locked on nicely. This one's a little twisted, but only because it's stuck in the hair. Let's finish this. We'll finish it off and we'll straighten it up. Adding feathers to a jig, there's guys that do it now, crappie guys using flank feathers from a mallard, to create almost the full body, along with calftail or bucktail, which look really good. But if you look through a lot of the older writings, feathers were used on bucktail streamers, as well as bucktail jigs to represent the gill plate and or the lateral fins on a fish. Looks much better. So let me finish this off and we will take a good look at it. So let me just add cement on this and we'll finish it off. And then we'll take a good look at it. Very nice. Oh. There we have it. The gold on the bottom, a little bit of flash, that black squirrel tail really ties in nicely. It lays nicely, and in some ways it seemed easier than the using a gray squirrel, though basically it's the same. And that barred hen cape really looks nice on the jig. Makes it look realistic. But I think that will do it for us today. I'm going to tie a couple more of these, maybe with some of the football heads. And I was going to use some of those other colors. That's why I have those other capes out here with the solid color, the tan, and the one that's kind of a dun, tannish dun color. If there's any colors that you think would look really good, especially with this barred type feather down the lateral line, put some comments down below. As always, like and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Feel free to share any of our videos, as it does help increase awareness for the channel. As always, guys, keep tying in tight lines.